Hey Panda Nation, you are listening to the Inverted Gear podcast with your hosts Nelson and Hillary. Join us every week as we take you behind the scenes into our brand, discuss upcoming projects, and conversate beyond the mat with the interesting people we've met along the way.
Hey Emily, how are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Doing great.
Hanging in there.
How's your little tribe doing?
Little tribe is okay. At the expense of mom. We have a bad case of mummitis at home right now with the youngest one. I don't know. I've often said boys are a different breed, but he's going through something where he needs me for everything, and it's driving me a little crazy.
And how old is he now?
He's about 20 months. But he had a rough night of sleep, and he was tossing and turning. He had to come into my bed, of course. And I don't know if you experienced this, Hillary, but like my children get very primal, and then they want to they need to have their faces on my arm, or like they need to be holding me and smelling me. And so he's doing this while half asleep and rolling left, right, up and down. And I can't sleep because I'm worried that he's going to roll himself right off the bed. So last night was not a great night.
Yeah. And Leo would do this thing where he insisted he needed to sleep his face on top of our face.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
No, man.
Yeah.
No.
Actually, Hero does this funny thing where he'll grab my hand and he'll just put it on his face. And I don't know, he likes sleeping like that. It's a very...
It's like, I need to know you're there. If I close my eyes, how am I supposed to know you're there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cute.
And then I have to tell myself to relax while my hand is on top of his face. But, children, they make you do strange things.
They do.
They're too funny.
They do.
So Leo started gymnastics on Saturday. And we did soccer with him before, and he he was a little apprehensive the first day, but joined the group, did all the drills, did an entire class structure, no problem. And he did that for 6 weeks? 8 weeks?
The soccer program, yes. I think it was 8 weeks.
And then we started gymnastics on Saturday, and he was on the lowest level class and would not do it. He not I dropped him off, walked away, gave him 10 minutes, and he just no, arms crossed, looking away from the teacher, wouldn't do it. So I went down. I was like, okay, if you don't want to do it, we can do something else. Or I tried to convince him. He's like, hey, because he wanted to do something else. I was like, we can go to the park after. He thought he was going to soccer practice, I think. And the manager came over and he's like, hey, there's a you and me program going on right now, the same class time. If you want, he can do 3 of those until he gets comfortable with being in here. Then we can move him back. Or if he wants to go entire semester doing that, we can. So I had to jump in the foam pits and do the tumbling with Leo.
And did you break your back?
Surprisingly, no.
I didn't know you got to go in with them. I thought that was...
Oh, mommy and me classes are great, or dad, parents and me. But I remember we went to a birthday party years ago, and someone had, the birthday party was at one of these jump you places, the trampoline spots. And I remember as a kid, I would love jumping on trampolines. So we paid, the kids were free. And if a parent wanted to jump, it was I don't know, $13 or something. So I paid for me to go jump with the kids because I figured maybe they'd need some help. So I kid you not, I must have jumped for a total of 10 to 15 minutes. But the next day I could barely walk.
Yeah, no, you forget how good of a workout that is.
Not only the workout, but the spine compression. I was like, I shouldn't do this.
Doing it for long periods of time.
I remember nursing a rib injury and going to one of those places. And as soon as I took a big jump on landing and catching myself, I was like, oh! Just going all right, not doing that again.
Oh man, yeah. I never thought I'd see the day where jumping and doing that kind of stuff would hurt me so much, but it was that wasn't fun.
So Emily, you've been doing Jiu-Jitsu for a long time, and now you're doing a really good job about getting your family into it. So can you talk us about your little ones joining mom?
So I think it's questionable if I'm doing a great job, but I do have a a sensibility about the fact that I think from practicing for over 2 decades and also teaching for more than half of that time, there are certain things that I've learned not to do. And some of those things being that I don't want to make what my ambition was for part of my life, my children's ambition. And I see the value in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for my children being something where they can develop good body awareness and harness and understand what it is that they can and can't do. I think that's really important as a human, that you understand what you can and can't do. It's not necessary that you know everything that you can do, as long as you know what you can't do, so that when you're in a position of danger or threat, you don't fool yourself into believing that you can do things that you really can't. And so my kids are 8, 5.5, and 20 months. The 20-month-old hero, he just slaughters people because he's a boy. He's nuts. He's a little bit of a gargoyle or Tasmanian devil. And my 2 girls, I really want them to have at least a basic fundamental understanding of what jiu-jitsu is and how to handle themselves on the mat, because they're girls. Not that I worry that someone will harm them all the time, but I think there's something really powerful about young women feeling empowered in their bodies. I think it's good for their self-esteem. I also think it's just good for them to learn how to carry themselves in front of anybody in a room. You know, like a lot of my life is spent in front of men, not just in jiu-jitsu, but also in business outside of jiu-jitsu. And I work pretty hard to be aware of who I'm in front of and to carry myself equally, regardless who the audience is. And I try not to shy back from opportunities just because I feel like I'm outnumbered or I'm the odd duck out. And there's a lot of reasons why I think jiu-jitsu is good for children. And so I tell my girls, mommy doesn't need you to compete. You don't need to be a world champion. You don't have to do any of those things. But it's really important that you guys learn how to feel comfortable in your bodies and how to defend yourselves. And I want you to do jiu-jitsu at least 1 time a week so that you can do that. And so far, there hasn't been a big pushback on that. They seem to respect that enough. I also steer really clear of teaching them. So, you know, we have a really good staff in place. I think having been open for 11 years, we've cultivated some really good instructors and leaders in our school. And my sentiments in developing our school has also been to not have a cult of personality here. I don't want the school to be about me. So I'm very happy to create more opportunities for my students to level up and teach. And so when my children learn in class, I let them learn from who that teacher is. And, you know, they've competed a couple times in some small in-house tournaments. And they competed because they wanted to compete, not because I said anything to them. In fact, I didn't say anything to them and they heard about it from other kids. And so I've said to myself, I don't think I want to teach my children jiu-jitsu unless they ask me to, because I also recognize that I will, if I take them seriously, they might not like me very much. And I also recognize as a parent, sometimes it's really frustrating to teach your own children. And even outside of jiu-jitsu, if I'm trying to read with my daughter, or if I'm trying to spell with my daughter, it can be harder for me to do that than it would be to work with someone else's child. And I think it's because they hit so close to home, and I do want them to do well, and I hold them to a high standard. So knowing that I don't have the best patience sometimes, and that I don't want to stress or pressurize their learning environment, I try to stay out of it. And they both do gymnastics as well. And the idea there is also for body awareness. I think the longer I've done jiu-jitsu and seen how important it's been in my self-development, it's really been about connecting the mind and the body and making sure that I don't just think about things and I don't just like daydream or strategize, but that I actually do a good job living in my body as well, because it connects me back to reality. And so I want my children to develop those values. And that's how I think about having children in jiu-jitsu.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
And
does it? I don't know.
Especially, Do you feel like, yeah, I mean, it's harder for them. Maybe it would be harder for kids too to like, I see it a lot, just going to their parents for coaching, like having that regular coaching. Like you want them to be able to come to you and ask anything, like the door's open, right? But being like their head instructor, you think that it would be harder for them to learn too? Like they'd feel maybe extra?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, right? Because my kids, I don't think have that much awareness around like what I do in jujitsu and how long I've done it and who I am, in what little capacity. Um, and I think that's good for them because there is, I'm learning a lot about human development and primarily adult development, but also about child development as well. And my oldest daughter, Saya, is 8 years old, and she's really going through a phase right now where she wants to relate to me in a lot of ways. So she seeks my approval. She wants to do things with me all the time. She imitates me. I'm even noticing, like, I really notice how much a parent has influence over their child because I walk around in athleisure most of the day, right? I'm wearing like athletic, like, spandex and some sort of a tank top or a workout top. And I do that because it's comfortable. It's easy for me to put on. I don't look atrocious, and it allows me to go to the gym and do all the things that I typically need to do. I'm not somebody who gets up in the morning and takes the time to do makeup and do my hair and put on a really nice outfit. I like doing that, but my lifestyle doesn't really accommodate that very well. So I get to do it, once a month, or if we ever go out. And so what's funny is Saya is at an age right now where she has started to see what I do. And she's like, can I buy yoga clothes? Can I look like you today, Mom? Or like, you're cooking. Can I help you cook? And it's interesting to see that transition with her because I see how important my behavior and what I do and the values I instill in her and what I act out as a person. I'm really starting to notice like how much it affects my children. And, they are really attached to me as a mom. And so in some ways I kind of don't, I don't know. I think I don't want them to see me in my full jujitsu regalia or in my full jujitsu mode because I'm also a little bit of a different person then. It's if I'm going to train, I'm a lot, and you want to see certain types of gains, I will be a very different kind of person. And I try to remember that I have to be a mom first. And as a mother, I want to be someone who is supportive and nurturing and challenges them sometimes because I think, I've learned that growth comes at the intersection of support and equal amounts of support and challenge. And I think that when I shift into the role of being a teacher, maybe for my children, it might be a little bit overweighted in challenge. And I try to be really careful of that because I was raised in a very strict household with a very fixed but very high bar in terms of how to behave and what I should try to accomplish. And I'm really aware of that. And so as I've gotten older and I've learned more about learning and learned more about cultivating healthier approach to development, I know where my weaknesses and my tendencies are. And so I think I try to pull away from that. And and so I try to be a mother and a parent first. And I'm trying to hold off being a teacher as much as possible because I know that my persona can change, and I don't want my children to think that I'm pushing them too hard or that I'm fighting them,
Oh yeah.
For sure.
I
Like,
love that.
we've been around the sport for a long time, and before that, like I was around wrestling, and I've seen how squirrely that relationship can get between like father and son as coaches, or like mother and daughter, and yeah, you can get weird real quick. And at the end of the day, I rather have a good relationship with my children than them being whatever world champion, Olympic champion,
Mm-hmm.
whatever thing they want to be. If and that's the other thing too. Is like I don't want to push this thing. It's like, hey, both of your parents are black belts, both of your parents competed and did well, but you are going to be a world champion.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, we talk about it all the time. It's like, I don't care if he wins a match, it's just, as long as you have jiu-jitsu in your life, as long as
it's important, like you said in the beginning, how they got started, that they have that basic knowledge to be how to carry themselves and defend themselves, and that body awareness of yourself and who you're with.
It's not legacy. I don't need to be a legacy parent, and I don't need my children to carry the torch anymore for me. Like, I don't, what I accomplished in my career, or, whether I still have more to do, who knows, but like, that's me. And I want my children to I want to help my children develop a firm sense of them, whatever that means, and like my younger daughter, Miyoki, she's not that, she's physical, but she hasn't taken to a lot of physical activity in the same way that her sister has. But if you're, listening to Kids Bop in the minivan, my daughter Miyoki, she has a beautiful voice. Like sometimes I'm shocked at how in tune she really is and how much she loves singing. And I've actually thought to myself recently, I'm like, she doesn't want to do gymnastics as much. She does jujitsu a couple times a week because I told her it's important to have some sort of physical activity. So she does that. And I've now thought, I was like, maybe I should ask her if she wants to take singing lessons, and like, I was raised in a household where my expression was not valued. My expression had to only be expressed through the vehicles in which my parents approved of. And that happened to be, tennis, piano, ballet, like very typical Eastern Asian activities. And even to the degree of like, okay, you want me to learn music? Well, can I learn guitar? No, it has to be the piano. And I'm careful to not give my kids too much either, because I've also seen the downside of maybe too much privilege or too much choice. But I see where they're inclined, and I see where their interest is. And so as a parent, I question, okay, like maybe I didn't have singing lessons, or this wasn't something that I necessarily got to do a lot of, but is this something my child would like to do? And is this a healthy way for them to be able to express themselves? And I think that's so important because, despite what people think about an arts education, I think expression in your body and again, like developing more awareness around who you are is it's vital to developing good humans. I don't want my children growing up feeling like they don't know themselves, or they don't know what they like, or they don't know how to do. And so I feel like these early formative years, for me anyways, should be spent helping them feel themselves, and I have the privilege of being able to work around some individuals who have gotten to know themselves very deeply at a very young age and performed very well at a very high level. And I work with people professionally now outside of, in jiu-jitsu and outside of jiu-jitsu, but I help adults figure out who they are and how to be at their best. I'm not there to help them figure out what their life mission is necessarily, or, what they should do with their career next year, as much as it is like cultivating a deeper appreciation and understanding and awareness around how you perform at your best and what it is that you're inspired to do. And really, I think helping people live a much more satisfying and fulfilling life. And so because I do that with adults, I think as a parent, if I have the ability or the influence to support my children so that they can do this sooner rather than later, I feel like maybe that would be my way of trying to help the planet or help the world, right? Is to support and guide good humans, because they're going to have a lot of complex problems that they have to solve for. And the more deeply they know themselves, I think the better they will be off, and the world will be off.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's deep.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
That's a lot of like forward thinking, like so many people get just caught up in the what's happening right now, and they don't like this one thing, so what's the next thing they're going to do, instead of that really being in tune with what they've all been up to.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the primary things that I feel I work with people on is not externalizing the blame. And a lot of the time when we are uncomfortable or we're not happy or something's going on, it's because of something that's going on outside of us. And when we're not equipped to deal with how we think about these things, it's very easy to point the finger and say it's everybody else and it's not me. When in reality, it's about how you handle these stresses and how you see yourself out of them. And so, that sort of internal way of living, it's kind of like if this is a Jiu-Jitsu podcast. So it's kind of like if you're fighting in a match and you're losing the match. And at the end of the match, you go, well, I lost because my opponent did this and that, and my opponent was stronger than me, and my opponent smelled bad, and my opponent cheated. It's not really about your opponent. It's about like, well, how come I didn't bring a stronger version of myself to the match? What could I have done to make my opponent react to me? How could I have strategized or dictated the pace of that match? A lot of us, I think, have fallen into a place where it's the norm to think it's everything else outside of us that makes or breaks the way that we feel. But I think that the most successful humans that I've been around understand that it's not about everybody else and everything else. It's about you. And as a parent, I take that to heart because, even with my daughters, sometimes they fight. And one of my kids will say, oh, well, like she did this to me and that's why I'm mad and she makes me feel bad. And I was like, no, she might have not done something very nice, but you made yourself mad. She couldn't make you mad. You made yourself mad. And you need to think about how you can handle your own feelings, right? And I think that's really important to remember because the way society is kind of devolved, there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming and saying like, it's these people and they did this and they did that. And it's like, yeah, but we have to learn to be accountable ourselves and understand that it begins with us, right? And I think with a lot of problems that I get wrapped up in or get pulled into, when we think about problem solving, I think it starts with the self and like, how accountable can we be in our actions to help change the tide of things?
Again. Wow. I'm like taking notes here.
I know. So profound, Emily.
Yeah, what was
It's
your
one of
coffee
those
this
things.
morning? Extra profound today.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that because I had such a terrible night of sleep that I drove through Princeton on my way to the school, and I stopped at Rojo's Roastery to get my favorite latte because I was like, oh man, I gotta like wake myself up from the dead today.
Mama needs it today.
Oh yeah, I needed it.
So we talked about your relationship with your kids and getting other people to find something they're good at and happiness through whatever pursuits they're going through. What pursuits outside of jiu-jitsu are you really into right now? I know there's a few.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, I'll start with a small one that happened over the pandemic, but I started getting really into gardening, which was really fun. And last year I grew some tomatoes and a few different kinds of squash and blueberries and whatnot, and some fancy peas. And this year I got super excited because I planted more fancy tomatoes and fancy bougie peas and all that kind of business and bougie squash. And I actually started growing some sugar baby watermelons, which was really fun. So last year I had a problem with some of my fancy squash not fruiting. And I learned a lot about vegetation and the fact that a lot of fruit needs to have the male flower needs to pollinate the female flower in order for there to be fruit. And I didn't have a lot of bees. So I would be like hand pollinating my squash flowers with Q-tips and brushes. And I had a really hard time getting my squash to fruit. And this year, I guess there's a big beehive that developed across the street. And so this year I had a bunch of squash start fruiting, which was really fun, and a few watermelons. And then, of course, we had where I live the deluge of rain from Hurricane Ida, and our garden got flooded, unfortunately. And so I don't think I'll be able to harvest my sugar baby watermelons and squash, but I did manage to get a few before the water hit them. So that's been super fun, just like gardening and cooking. And another thing that I've also picked up recently has been surfing. And maybe not so recently. I've probably been trying to do this for a few years, not very well. And there's something to learning how to be a beginner again. And I think, it's also important to state that, like I've been doing jujitsu for 21 years and not only practicing, but teaching and cultivating business. And sometimes it's really hard to be seen in that role where everyone expects you to know something, or that you know more than most people in the room, and to sort of oscillate back and forth between being a student versus being a teacher. Sometimes the freedom of not knowing anything is really refreshing. And so surfing has been really great for me in that respect. I have some opportunities to surf in Central America, and I've tried to surf out here on the Jersey Shore, of course, in a full wetsuit in the wintertime. But surfing's been really challenging, but it's been interesting for me to dive into something different, because I've taken the better part of 20 years to become good at, or, half decent at doing one thing. And I think the second time around, trying to pick something else up, I don't know that I necessarily want to be a world-class surfer, but I'd like to be legitimate at some point. And I think I've learned to be a better student, I hope, from not only studying one thing deeply, but also objectively having to teach others. And I think sometimes when we become teachers, we learn to be better students, because all the little things that are frustrating to have to teach around, like sometimes you get people that won't listen, or people that just want to do their own thing all the time, or people that really struggle with things. And so I try to be mindful as a teacher. And then when I'm in a role of being a student, I go, okay, like, how can I approach this learning process better so that I'm becoming a more efficient learner and I create less friction for myself? So surfing has been really fun in that regard. I just wish that I didn't have to drive an hour away all the time to surf, or get on a plane and go somewhere. So yeah. And I just recently got a one wheel so that I could practice balancing like you would need to balance on a surfboard on pavement, because pavement is readily available. So I haven't killed myself yet, which is good. I can't hear you, Hillary. Can you hear me? Yeah, there you are. Yeah, now I can hear you.
There I am. Sorry. You know what? The little one started raging, so he went to go check on him. But so you're practicing your balance on a unicycle?
No, it's a one wheel, which is like, it's kind of like it's an electric board almost, but it's
board,
like,
and the wheels in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I wanted to try those, because like we got really into snowboarding for a while when we could.
Yes.
I wasn't pregnant.
Yes.
And I was like, that was one of the things, like, I really loved that. I kind of felt the same way, that freedom of learning something new, going in, not knowing anything, but just committing to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And wanting to be a student again. And I saw like a video when we were at one of the board shops around here, how to pretty much snowboard when you're out of season, and
Yes.
they recommended that thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because actually Josh had recommended that I get one, and because he came to surfing late in life, and he had said for like a lot of people who surf big time started surfing as children, and as you've probably witnessed yourself, when you pick something up as a child, there is a second nature to your movement, right? Same thing as like people who are competing in jiu-jitsu now, who began training as children, have a different quality of movement about them. And so when you try to pick up a board sport as an adult, it's not the easiest thing to do because there's a particular way that you've taught yourself how to walk and balance and be. And so it's interesting, like I've been working on my pop-up, and once I pop up, if the pop-up isn't really precise, then it makes it much harder to balance and manipulate the board as you're trying to carve through waves. And so when you're on the one wheel, something that I've been working on is just like where my weight goes when I want to start turning or doing anything, because, in surfing, I would get up on my board and they would say, okay, one of the things I was being really challenged by was I would get up on my board and then I had a hard time surfing the face of the wave. Like the drop of getting into the wave was like so jarring to me, and I would always fall off my board there. And one of my instructors had said, you need to let your weight lean forward, like before you pop up, let your nose come down and like lean into the wave. And I was just like, wait a second, but that's like totally off, because in grappling, if you lean way too forward, then your base is, completely off balance.
You're asking to fall forward right into the water, right?
Exactly.
That's
what it feels like. And it's because obviously like my muscle memory has taught me so. But getting on the one wheel helped me understand, oh, okay, it's not bringing my entire weight forward. It's more of like an intentional shift into my front leg. So like it's using the pads of my feet a little bit differently, and it's loosening my body movement up. So like I feel like when I'm on a one wheel, I have to be a lot more, at ease in my body, as opposed to in jujitsu, I almost want to have a certain tenseness or aliveness in my body when I'm rolling. I don't want to be like flip-floppy, and loose. But I find that on the one wheel and in surfing, sometimes you have to have that like looseness. So it's been really interesting for me to start learning on the one wheel, because I've had to develop a completely different sense of balance and movement. And so, so it's funny and it's comical, because I'm just like, I just don't want to kill myself because it goes pretty fast. Like it can get up to like 19 miles an hour. So I went and got like a good helmet, and I got a bunch of like elbow and knee and wrist pads. And I'm just like, oh my God. And it's also like, there's ways of dismounting the board that are not so easy, because like you can't just like tip backwards and jump off the board. That'll send the wheel flying forward. So it's learning a whole new set of skills, and not easy.
Oh, I want to try it next time we get
together.
Oh
yeah. We'll have fun.
Because it's funny how you say, like you mentioned like how there's a certain type of tension you want when you roll, and how really teaching your body to relax so you can do the surfing. Like I found the same way with snowboarding. Have you ever been snowboarding too?
No, I've been skiing, but I never tried snowboarding. But now I'm curious because, I want to see the crossover.
I haven't done enough surfing, I think, to compare, because for me, when I tried surfing, it was just a matter of getting up on the board and being able to stay up. But there is a certain relaxation I remember my instructors on both sides wanted me to have, and I just couldn't. It took me a long time to do it on the snowboard. But once you learn to relax and glide, but be able to shift your weight so you can turn, and how like you don't want to like lean forward, like you said, like that same feeling, but you need to lean forward so you can actually go when the land gets more flat, because you can't just push like you would on skis.
And that was
you need to be able to have that enough momentum.
And that was one of my problems with surfing, was I would get up on the board and then I would constantly break myself because I would feel myself going too fast, so then I'd lean into my back foot. And my instructor would be like, you know, every time you do that, you slow the board down and then you get off the wave. So like I've had to learn not to do that. Right. And it's just so foreign to me because in jujitsu, it's the opposite. But it's trying to understand your body in a whole new way. And sometimes you have to unlearn to learn again. My children, I have my girls skateboarding too. They started over the pandemic. And they get to take private lessons from this really awesome really, really incredible young high school girl who we met at the skate park. And she's just really so well composed and poised, and has beautiful technique. And so she's teaching my girls how to like drop in on the half pipe and go down ramps.
Oh,
And I'm just like,
wow.
fuck, man. Like, I was like, I wish I could have done that when I was a kid.
Yes.
But, you know, these are all things that, like, as an adult, as I learn how difficult these things are, I'm like, you know what? I'd love for my kids to learn some of this so that when they're adults, they can access it, you know, like they can understand it. Because as children, your minds are so malleable. And as adults, you know, it's hard to learn things as adults because it's like we train ourselves out of natural movement, right? And so the more I can give my kids in terms of just touch points so that they can access that feeling, I guess I'm trying to give them all the things that I couldn't have.
I know. But it sounds like you found the balance of not overwhelming them. Like I feel like sometimes kids these days, they're too stressed with too many being pulled in so many different things. Like, okay, my lineup is piano lessons, soccer, jujitsu, I don't know what else, like
A lot.
And it just like language learning and all these extra things on top of each other, and then they're thrown into competing and everything along with it.
Well, you know, I think that there was a trend for a while where specialization kind of got a lot of attention, right? And I remember growing up in Canada and playing sports like basketball, volleyball. I remember in school, they would say, oh, well, the American high school system or the American kids, like they're playing camps all through the summer and they're super competitive and they're super specialized. And in Canada, you know, they were starting to do that a little bit, but it wasn't nearly as focused at a young age. And I used to think, you know, I remember when the word multitasking was a good word, and then it became a bad word because multitasking meant that you weren't focused and you weren't specialized. And so then I thought, well, what am I specialized in? Because I don't know that I'm much of a specialist. I sort of tended to dabble in a lot of things, and I could do most things pretty well. And I used to really get on myself for not being more specialized and more concentrated in what it was that I was studying or learning or doing. And oh, we have the little guy. The only way to make him stop crying. I see it. I get it.
He's so happy right now.
But I read, I think I recommended this book to you guys. Range, why generalists triumph over specialists. And
Yes.
it was by David Epstein. And it was one of the first, I guess, you know, books out there on a more mainstream level that advocated for why not specializing could be a good idea. And I had a long talk with Josh about this one time because sometimes I feel like, oh, well, I became decently good at this, but I wasn't really the best. And he said, well, yeah, but that's false because you have been the best at jiu-jitsu. And he goes, but you know, most people learn one way or the other. Like they approach learning very deeply or they approach learning very broadly. And he goes, but something that's really interesting about you is you do both. And he's like, you learn broadly and you actually like breadth, but you also understand excellence because you've gone very deep in a few things, right? And he's like, and that's not easy to do. And most people wouldn't do both. And when he made that comment, it was like, oh, like that's why I've done all these things and sometimes I feel like it amounts to nothing, is because when we become very siloed in what it is that we do, it's very difficult to see how much effect it has over time or what it all adds up to. And I guess in the path that I've kind of randomly chosen myself, I tend to cross-pollinate a lot, and like things that I learn in one avenue or one way, I can sometimes take what I've learned and I apply it to something else, you know. And something that he had said that also resonated with me is like, you know, people at the highest levels will learn things locally and apply them universally. And it's so true, right? Like learning something deeply in jiu-jitsu and then applying the principle to life, or applying the principle to surfing or snowboarding. And that's when I think learning becomes really fun, because you can mix things up and you really get the most out of not only your activities, but then I think it also teaches you so much about yourself and about life. So I'm right now, I'm actually reading Roger Federer's new biography. It just came out like a couple weeks ago. And that's been really interesting to read, because Federer comes up in that range book as being someone who came to tennis late in life. He was not a specialist like Tiger Woods was with golf. So I think it's just interesting to, have a better understanding of how we develop as people, and that the recipe is different for everyone, and we don't all have to be specialists and we don't all have to be generalists, but the better we learn and understand ourselves, the more success we'll have.
He was a soccer player, right?
Yeah, he played soccer. I mean, he did a lot of things. I think he was athletic. He dabbled in and played around in a lot of things, but it wasn't until much later, like as a teenager, that he decided that he was going to really focus on tennis.
I like that, how people are able to stay flexible too, like opening your mind and body and to that learning of something new, being able to stay flexible. Like maybe you get bored of something, or just that constant curiosity of wanting to try something new and letting yourself learn and excel, and just keeping things interesting.
Well, the way I look at it now that I'm older, and I went so deep into jiu-jitsu rabbit hole, is at the one point it's just developing skills, and then you, like you said, cross-pollinating, and you can apply your jiu-jitsu skills into other areas of grappling or a different sport, or business, whatever. But being able to develop skills, and then just going very deep in specific areas, and then going more broadly in other areas that are gonna help that one specific area. And I think that one of the greatest assets that jiu-jitsu gives you is that patience, and just looking like the long-term perspective of like a white belt that works with a black belt, and just realizing it's like, hey, this guy is gonna tool me for a long, long, long time. And then you have two kinds of people that come to a jiu-jitsu gym. The guys are like, oh my God, I'm gonna be able to do this one day, versus the guys that are like, I'm never gonna catch up to this guy.
Yeah.
But
I also think it's about generating different value systems, right? Like, we've all met the jiu-jitsu practitioner or instructor or athlete who's so dogmatic about jiu-jitsu, and they think that because they're a black belt or because they're a champion in this one thing, that it then makes them, validated to be a champion at everything in life. And, they only see their life through that one perspective, through that one lens. And subjectively, they think that that's the only thing that matters. So I think something that's really important about cultivating different interests, or cross-pollinating, if you will, is learning to develop value in more than one area, right? And so I don't just work in jiu-jitsu, or I don't just love jiu-jitsu, but I'm involved in business, or I'm involved in all of these other endeavors or startups, and I have different groups of friends, and I have different types of interests. That's something else that I also try to bring as a parent to my children is, with all of the depression and low self-esteem and inability to cope with stress, I think that it's important to give our children the opportunity to see their value in more than one way. So I make sure that my children have more than one group of friends. They have friends at school, they have neighborhood friends, they have friends at gymnastics, they have adult friends. What I like about that is if they get into a fight with the neighbor's kid, then they know that other people still love them and respect them and appreciate them, and I think the more we're able to demonstrate our value in different places, the less we are in danger of, attaching ourselves too deeply to one thing, and then feeling like if that one thing isn't working for us, that we're we've wasted our lives, or we don't know what we're doing. And I see this happen a lot in jiu-jitsu. People that basically throw most of their attention into jiu-jitsu, and then if they don't become that world champion, because the reality is it's not easy now to become a world champion. It's not in my day, it was a different kind of difficult, but it wasn't the same kind of difficult it is now because the sport was still emerging. But if you don't achieve that goal, does that mean that your life is worthless? No. There's so many other ways that you can prove your value and be a productive member of society. But the more we silo ourselves and the more we specialize only in one thing, and we lose the perspective of seeing that, hey, like we can use these skills in other areas, or there's other things that we can be interested in. I think that's where we like run the risk of harming ourselves, right? And harming the world around us. So, I think centrally throughout this conversation, as we've talked about parenting and children, like I think about cultivating a person as a whole and just understanding that our value comes in more than one way and more than one package.
I first came across this when I was in high school, and I remember like one of the first tournaments of the year for us was the county tournament. And this was like right around it was actually in between Christmas and New Year's. So you can imagine how fun it is for a high school kid to have to make weight during that time. So I remember like one kid came in, he was like the favorite to win the tournament, and he loses the tournament. I think doesn't even make the semis. And I just remember like this kid just raging and like going in the locker room and like breaking and like, kicking cans over, like, that kind of stuff. And then that was very common in high school wrestling. Like, during my career, so a few times, like, these kids have all these expectations on them. Like, their brother was a state champion, their dad is the coach, or their dad was a state champion, and they've been wrestling since they were 4. And there's all these pressures, whether they're applying them on themselves, where their coaches are putting on them, their teammates. Sometimes, like, New Jersey and Pennsylvania have these wrestling towns, and like, the town is looking at you and expecting you to bring a state championship or whatever. And I remember, like, I wrestled 2 years in high school. It was like I was never expected to go above 500, So like every time I had a big win or I made it to the finals, like semifinals of a tournament, or made it through the region, I was not expected to. And I just remember that, like, as a young kid, I just being like, man, like, I never want that. And then like I definitely don't want that for my kids. So like now when I don't, like, we talked about, like, we are not putting expectations into our kids of being whatever jiu-jitsu superstar. I just make a point, like, every time my friends, even if they joke around, it's like, oh, it's like future world champion right there. I was like, nope. It's like future good dude right there. Yeah. That's all I want.
Yeah, no, really.
Be a good dude. And sometimes I joke around, is like, well-rounded people don't win world championships. It's like, especially now, as you mentioned, it's like so hard to do. It's like, you have these kids dropping out of high school or getting their GED and training full time. It's like, I want my kid to go to high school. I want my kid to play all the sports in high school.
Yeah.
I want my kid to have a life in high school.
Yeah.
So like, the chances that he wins a world championship, we're like, just doing all those things and doing jiu-jitsu, can this guy pull it off? Maybe. I don't know. Like, we'll be rooting for him, but I want him to be able to, like we said, like, he's acquired all these skills and not specialize early. And like, we're going to expose him to as many little sports as he's interested in. And just, I think, I know when we hang out, we talked about the book Grit a bunch of times. Was it Angela Duckworth? Right?
Yeah, Angela Duckworth.
And like, I like one of her rules for her kids is like, you need to do one hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like, hey, like, you need to do something physical that's hard, and it's going to take you, like, a long time to develop these skills, whether it's playing soccer at a high level, basketball, or like, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, whatever you're into, is like you're going to have some kind of like movement practice in your life.
Yeah.
And then like something like, and then like the same thing is like something else outside of that, like whether it's playing an instrument, learning a different language, whatever, but like, just develop your skills besides like, sitting in front of the computer and playing Xbox all day.
Yeah. And I also think that when you are, so like being a well-rounded human or being socialized in a way, right? Like being able to get on well with others is sometimes the opposite of going super deep on something and knowing yourself really deeply, right? Because I said to many people, in order to be a high level athlete, a lot of the times you have to turn inwards, and it is a very selfish process, right? Having to think about yourself first, your rest, your eats, your training. It's not the easiest thing to balance that with having a family. It's easier to do it when you don't have any dependents and you only have to worry about yourself. But that being said, I think, we're kind of going through these growing pains right now as a whole in jiu-jitsu. But when you spend 10 years or 20 years of your life only thinking about yourself and your needs, you do reach a level of excellence that maybe other people have not, in terms of knowing themselves that deeply. However, sometimes it doesn't make you the most amenable coach or leader, because we've now said, okay, you've achieved excellence in one thing, and therefore you should now teach everyone else, or you should lead everyone else to do the same thing that you did. But that person might be very ill-equipped to then work with others. And as a result, we see a lot of this abusive leadership that we now see within the sport, right? And so I think cultivating individuals who have a balance of both, who can value and appreciate how we all need to sort of get along with each other and work with each other, versus achieve something really deeply on a personal level. Ultimately, it would be great to be able to do both things, right? So that on one hand, you as a person are deeply fulfilled, and that you have learned something about yourself that you can share with the world. But then also, it's an entirely different thing to know how to share what you know with the world, and do so in a way that doesn't harm others. So to your point, Nelson, it's like, I don't want to say that as a parent, or as a person, you have to choose, but I think having the awareness of knowing that one thing does not necessarily equate to the other is super important, because just having some sensibility about these things, I think it just turns the light on when we start walking that path. And it allows us to hopefully guide ourselves, and then potentially our children, to do a little bit of both if it's important. Hey, Lucio.
Yeah,
wide awake.
Somebody wants headphones and a mic.
Yeah.
Look at that neck control.
Doing great, right?
He is.
All right, Emily.
We're planning your future right now, little man.
Yeah. Ready for coaching sessions with the Emily. All right, the Emily, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online?
So I'd say probably the best place to reach me is you can go to my website, emilykwok.com. It's KWOK. I think that links to all my social media, or you can send me an email or sign up for an email list there. I'm going to be coming out with a short series of podcasts soon myself that I'm in the middle of producing on the Master and the Apprentice. And the idea there is just exploring the relationship we all have to learning from pre-existing people or structures. And when we get to a level of depth, or in some cases mastery, and we can sort of leave those forms or structures behind, like when do we actually take control of our own processes and internalize them enough that we are then creating things for ourselves. So I'm really looking forward to releasing that. So that'll be coming out soon. So if you're interested, please sign up for the email list on my website.
Awesome. And then
thank you.
Please do, because as you can tell from this podcast, Emily does know what she's talking about when it comes to these topics.
I know.
Sometimes.
Always insightful.
Always insightful, friend. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.
All right, peace. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, Panda Nation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Inverted Gear podcast. You can find us at invertedgear.com, as well as your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to give us a like, and we'll see you soon.